Okay, I wanted to make money on central banking, inflation, debt, money creation, these sorts of topics. Um, I made a similar video. It was one of my first videos that I created called Money, Energy, and the Zero Sum Game. Um, Essentially, the way money is created is essentially created through debt. As I explained in that video that I just um, listed, there really is no such thing as money, right? Money doesn't exist. All it is just keeping accounts. See, money is essentially just currency, and currency is energy, and energy is zero. It's a zero sum game. However, it oscillates between the positive and negative polarities, above and below zero. So zero is the anchor point of the baseline, and then it oscillates above, which is credit, and below, which is debt, right? That's energy. It flows in a circuit like currency, and like every like energy, like every circuit, right, has if you just look at a battery and all these, it always has a plus and a negative side that the currency is circulating around, right? So really, there's no such thing as money. It's equivalent to zero, right? Um, the problem is, right, that humans have a drive for constant growth and progression. And because in the mass collective consciousness, we identify ourselves to be physical beings, because we identify ourselves to be physical beings and we perceive the world to be physical, as a result, it seems to us that progressing and growing can only be done by attaining more physical material. So essentially, we try to expand and grow our wealth by acquiring more physical assets, such as having a house. We would refer to someone as being extremely wealthy if they owned 10 houses and they own this physical business which generates cash flow, and they own lots of gold and all of this stuff. These are all physical things, right? And we think that the more the better, right? The more physical assets you've acquired, the more wealthy you are, right? So when we're trying to expand and grow and progress, we're always trying to expand and grow and progress physically. And in our current modern system, you can only acquire all these physical assets through money and currency, right? And all of this is governed within the economy. Essentially, my main point is, right, that money is equal to zero, and that's how it should always remain. However, we have this underlying collective desire to always be in profit. So essentially, it's like we're trying to be above the baseline and never go below the baseline into minus. And we not only do we want to stay above the baseline in plus, we want to continuously go higher and higher into more plus indefinitely, and never go into minus, below zero, essentially, right? Which is impossible. However, we've created a system to where it seems like that is happening and that is possible. It seems like if you look at the stocks and all these financial assets, it seems like we're growing indefinitely. It seems like we're always going up, always progressing. But it's actually an illusion, right? The way the money is created is through central banking. These central banks buy bonds from governments, which are essentially, they're just loans. The central banks are loaning the government money, right? So they can create money out of thin air and loan it to the governments with the promise that it will be paid back by the governments in the future with interest, right? However, see, this is where the problem lies, is that if the central banks are the ones creating the money, right? Like, money's not coming from anywhere else. The central banks are creating it. They're the sole creators of money. So if they're loaning the government's money and expecting the governments to pay it back with interest, that interest, so let's say the central banks loaned the United States government 100 billion. Then in the future, the United States government will owe the central bank more than 100 billion. But there isn't more than 100 billion in circulation. See, obviously this is just like a separate like situation. Let's just say, for example, there was only the United States Central Bank and then only the United States government. Of course, there's multiple central banks and multiple governments and so on and so forth, but it's equivalent around the globe, right? Because it's always the central banks that are creating the currency. So it might seem like, oh yes, like they loan them 100 billion and they have to pay them back more than 100 billion, but the United States government, they can get that money from somewhere else, like somewhere in the economy. But see, all that somewhere else is also, all that money that came from somewhere else was also created by another central bank who was loaning that to another government with interest attached to it. So essentially, there's never enough money in circulation to pay back the original loan with the interest on top. It's impossible because there's not enough like money in circulation. So a lot of that money, of course, is going to be paid off from taxes from the citizens who are working. But at the same time, you have to think these loans are happening at such a large, high level, right? Such a gross level that the amount of debt that has to be paid back, it's almost impossible to pay it back. So more loans have to then be taken out to pay back that original debt. And then it's an endless cycle, and then the debt keeps on growing indefinitely. So an analogy, right, is like, imagine I am the only person in the world who creates money, right? I'm the one who creates everything, all the money. And then I loan £100 to this person. And then when they have to pay it back, they have to pay me back £110, right? And then I've loaned 200 to someone else. And then when they have to pay me back, they have to pay me 230 or whatever. See, the money, the only money that there is in circulation is the money that I originally created. So do you see that when they have to pay back that money, they have to pay back more money than money that exists in circulation. So the only way that all these debts with interest attached to them will be paid off is by taking more loans out in the future and then just taxing the citizens even more. So this system works very well to create big booms in the short term. So that's what's really happened over the last century or last few decades and so on, is that there's been a big economic boom, right? And it seems like we're making so much progress and all this stuff, but this is not sustainable in the long term, because a lot of the progress that we've made has been built or achieved using currency or energy or money that didn't even exist yet. So essentially, another way to look at it is like we are borrowing or we're stealing money and currency from the future, because as I said, then all of those remainders of the debt that can't be paid off just gets put onto the tab of the of the citizens who have to pay that off through taxes, right? So then the citizens have to work more to pay off more taxes for works that have been created using currency that was also created from a loan, from debt with interest attached to it, right? So it seems like complicated, and it is quite complex, and I myself, I'm not an economist or anything like that, so I may get some details wrong. Definitely may get some details wrong, but I think that I understand the overall generally clearly, right? So this system it can help create booms in the short term, and that's what makes it seem like it's working and what makes it seem like it's worth it. But in the end, it like necessarily has to collapse, because these debts have to be paid off, right? And see, because I was even doing some research before on why these central banks exist, and like one of the reasons what they were saying is that before the central banks existed, there were a lot of like depressions, economic downturns, and so on and so forth. And that may seem like a negative thing. I may be ignorant, right? I'm young, so there may still be some things that I'm missing out. But according to my current understanding, that seems like a negative thing, that there was more depressions and all this stuff. But what that was before the central banks existed was just that the economy was really reflecting what the current situation actually was, and the currency was remaining at zero. It wasn't, in a sense, artificially being pumped above what it actually is, using this imaginary money that they're creating. So all those downturns that was happening was just reflecting the natural boom and bust cycle, the sine wave, and just how currency operates. It operates in a wave function. That's just how it operates. Sometimes it's above zero, sometimes it's below zero. And in the short term, that may not seem like it's working so well, like it's not having big booms and so on, but it would be a lot more sustainable in the long term, because that's everything is keeping correct accounts for the currency, which is just the time and energy of the people, the masses themselves, because they're the ones who are actually working and creating everything, right? They're the ones with actual energy and currency in them, right? Like Doesn't matter what you think and what you're printing. If there's no humans to go to work and do the the tasks, then there's not going to be anything, right? So it's actually the humans. It's like the energy of the human beings, the currency. That's actually what the real money is. It's human energy, right? So essentially, with this system, because they was able to essentially give so many loans out to big businesses. These businesses were able to make big investments and speculate on stock markets and so on and so forth, and generate a lot of revenue. And then when you look at and therefore a lot of technology has been progressing. So there has been a lot of progress technology wise, right? And in stock market returns and all of these things. But I'm not sure that these things will be able to be sustained. Like for a while, it seemed like it was being able to sustain, but from 2008, that's where, see, because as I said, these debts that can't be paid off because the money's not there, that's being paid off by future taxpayers. It's essentially being paid by future generations. That's why I'm saying another way to look at it is like we're borrowing money from the future to accomplish works in the present, right? And then it seems like, oh, we did all of this now, so great and so on, but the future generation is going to have to pay for that, and they're going to be much more financially restricted, and inflation is going to rise. And this is what's happening with all the younger generations now, such as my generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, or whatever they're called. If you look at the prices now of housing, like my whole generation, I'm sure there's like some anomalies who might be able to get a house here and there, but as a whole, as a general rule, my generation, if you look at just statistically, a much larger percentage of people between like 20 and 30 or whatever are still living at their parents' home, not because they want to, but because they can't afford to move out and own a home. It's just not possible with the inflation that's happening now. And why is all that inflation happening? Like, people don't understand, but it's because of all of this central bank printing and all of these mechanisms which have been in place for the last few decades and even up to a century. And that's even been going on for even longer than that, really and truly. Because these things have been happening in different forms. There's even a term for it in Islam. I think it's called riba or something. I think it's called riba, if I'm not mistaken. And that is actually been banned in that religion. And I don't even agree with everything that Islam has to say and all that. But with this, I completely agree. Because any time that money is being created using debt and interest, I don't think there's a problem with money being created through debt. But there's a problem with creating money through debt with interest attached on it. That's the problem. That is the root core of the problem, in my opinion. Because essentially, it's like, I've used this analogy before, it's like you put 10 people in a room with 10 meals. And then, more than likely, if they're all civil people and so on, each person will get one meal and there'll be no problems. And then, tomorrow, You put 10 people in the same room, you've kept them in the room, but now you've put 9 meals, right? And then, yeah, there's maybe some arguments, but still they'll each kind of share and so on, and then 8 meals, and then 7 meals. But then imagine when there's only 3 meals and 2 meals in the room, but there's still 10 people. That's when crime's gonna go up. They're all gonna start backstabbing each other, just trying to get that meal to survive, because there's less in circulation, right? So they're all battling for scraps. So this is, in a sense, kind of what's happening with the inflation, is that the purchasing power of the money has gone down so much because they've printed so much. They've printed so... Anytime, basic economics is supply and demand, right? So if there's such a large supply of anything, right, then the value becomes way lower. And these things have happened in Venezuela and Argentina and Turkey. All of these things, this hyperinflation has happened already, and people are speculating that that could even happen to the American dollar, which is essentially the world reserve currency. And it's kind of being speculated that if that happens, if the US dollar, which is the world reserve currency, if that collapses completely, which has already been collapsing slowly year by year, you can look on the charts, the DXY is slowly, but like decade by decade, loses its value. Then if that completely collapses, then it's speculated that the whole kind of monetary system could completely collapse, and who knows what will happen after that. Could be complete anarchy, because money is essentially the lubrication of the whole system. Everyone's working for money because everything is based around trade, right? We came from barter system, which is all about trade, and even with money, it's still about trade. It's just that it helps lubricate the system, where if I have something, if I want to trade with you and I have something that you want, but you don't have anything that I want, then you can just give me these paper notes or whatever that which represents value, and then I can just use that. If it's accepted everywhere, like that, you can use that to purchase things, then I can just use that to buy something that I want, which is equivalent to that value. So it just helps lubricate the system. It makes things a lot easier to trade. So there's nothing wrong with money, like in its actual form. It's just that when money is being created through these, if I can say, unethical ways, then there may be good results in the short term, but in the long term, eventually it's not going to be sustainable and it's going to collapse. That system will collapse, because as I said, it's being paid for by humans. So like, you can't just keep on raising tax and tax and tax. Like, there's only a certain threshold, there's only a certain amount that humans can even work. So imagine the taxes and the debt go so high that the demand on humans to pay it back. Like, if you look at people working now, they're working more than they ever really have. Yes, there's a lot of people who are unemployed, but the people who are working are doing more overtime than they've ever done. Like, if you're actually just working yourself and you look at like what's going on, like, I'm working, I can see it. Like, there's people working from, like, they're working every overtime that there is. Like Saturdays, Sundays, they're doing, just not even to be thriving, just to survive and pay the bills and their taxes. Like, so if the threshold becomes so high to be able to pay off those debts, then eventually human beings who actually have to work and like accomplish those tasks and work will not be able to sustain that that required threshold of manual labor, because they just won't have the energy for it. So it's almost like because we borrowed money from the future, we was able to do more now than we should have been able to do. But as a result, the future will be able to do less than what they could have done, because they're paying off the debts that we like created, right? It's hard to kind of explain, but yeah, it's very sinister, because if you really think about it, there's nothing, what I explained before, there's nothing really wrong with humans desiring to evolve, grow, and expand. However, if we really want to do that, if we really want the human race, like the human species, to keep evolving, expanding, and progressing, then we have to create a world which, like, by each generation, we should be leaving the world in a better place than it was when we came here, right? And it should be easier for the next upcoming generations. They should have more opportunities, more infrastructure, more support to be able to cultivate their talents and their value and what they will be able to offer to the world and to future generations. So it's like we should be building up step by step. But actually what we're doing now is that we're trying so hard to progress and profit now at the expense of the future. And then that can have dire consequences. Because the upcoming generations, they're going to just become wage slaves, all of them, just paying off debts and taxes that they had nothing to do with. And that's going to be limiting their capacity for creative expression, because even creativity, you need time and space for these things to be able to flower and really be executed at a high level, at the highest level, to be able to fill the highest potential. Like, creativity needs time, it needs space, you need time to be able to think of different ideas, have different visions, try different things. And you can't do that if you are too busy working 50, 60-hour weeks every week, just trying to pay your bills and taxes and debts and so on and so forth, right? Like, you won't be able to. Everyone will just become a robot. So, but the problem is that it's so deep in the system. This is like, it's so at the root core of the system that changing this system without like collapsing the system, I feel would be a very, 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 very difficult task. And I don't know, I think it might have to collapse. It might have to collapse for things to reform, for a new system to be implemented, which will be more about long-term longevity, a more sustainable system. So essentially, I think that what I was saying as well is that there's not necessarily a problem with money being created through debt, right? And banks borrowing institutions money so that they can have startup capital to invest themselves and get businesses going and so on and so forth, get the ball rolling, which they can pay back and then generate more profits and so on. That's fine, But I think that the interest being charged on that debt is the problem. And but then people would say, if we remove that, then what would be the incentive for these institutions to pay back those loans, and then what would stop them from just taking out more and more and more loans, right? But I think that there could be other incentives other than interest. For example, if you take out one loan, you can't take out another loan until you pay back the last loan. And for example, it could be measured how long you take to pay back the loan, and if you pay it back faster, then you'll have a higher allowance to take a larger loan out in the future, and if you take longer, then you'll have a lower allowance to take out a loan in the future, and so on and so forth. I feel like there's other creative ways where we can create incentives to pay back these loans without adding interest on the debt. And that way, the money will always be equal to zero, rather than if you look at, for example, the US debt right now, it's like, I haven't even checked for a long time, but it's like 40 trillion or something in debt. And it took from, if I'm not mistaken, it took from 1776 or like many centuries ago until like somewhere just in the 20th century to even just reach 1 trillion. Like, it took many centuries. Then just within less than that century, it went up like over 3 trillion, and then another 3. Like, it's in such a short amount of time, especially after COVID, the amount of debt that has gone up is essentially exponential. And I don't think that it's gonna stop until like it collapses. Because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe because the central banks have an infinite, they can essentially print infinite amounts of money. Maybe they can keep on juggling the balls. But I think that eventually, because recently, like another mechanism is like raising interest rate. Like when inflation's high, I'm not sure. I might get the inverses wrong, but I think when inflation's high, they put the interest rates low, and when inflation's low, they put the interest rates high, and so on and so forth, and try to kind of use this as a lever to stabilize markets and so on. But even recently, when they bring the interest rates lower and so on and so forth, it's like it's not even having as much of an effect as it did before. Because see, like, it may seem like they have infinite amount of money, but what money and real currency actually is energy, and that can't be created. So what they can create is like digital numbers on the screen. And yes, because it's faith-based, humans will invest their energy. They're buying into the system, so they can make that infinite money seem like it is infinite money. But eventually, like, the humans themselves, which are buying into that system, the amount that they digitally create, like, will not be able to be sustained by the humans, and that's when it will be collapsed. So I think that there has to be central banks and so on, but they can create money through loans and so on, but it shouldn't be able to. Yeah, there should be no debt on interest. I mean, interest on the debt, and yeah, I think that's one of the main things. And see, this will also keep in check, because all societies are going to be hierarchical, right? All of these like higher order systems are going to naturally evolve into hierarchies. So it's impossible to have like a complete socialistic system, because then you wouldn't really even know who makes the decisions, and who, like, it just wouldn't work, right? So it's always gonna end up in a hierarchy. But at the same time, the problem now is with this current system is that the people at the top can create a monopoly, because they have so much like money. Because think about it, the central banks, they're loaning out all this money, they're charging on interest, so they can amass so much like capital. It's just like keeps on pumping the system. Like, it's just a constant influx of capital. So, like, if you look at like, apparently, like the Japanese central banks owns like 80% of their stock market, and like, like essentially the central banks own the world in a sense, right? They own everything, so they can create a monopoly on power and just keep on increasing their profit margins at the expense of the common man, who's getting poorer and poorer because they're working more and more, but they're being taxed more, and then the money that they're being paid is worth less because of inflation. So they're just being stolen. Like, essentially, they're siphoning the currency from the common man. So the discrepancy between the elites and the common man becomes larger and larger and larger, and that creates a problem because that creates civil unrest, and that then creates all kinds of problems, right? So I'm not even sure. So this also, what I'm about to suggest now, is not really well, it is linked in with currency and so on, but it's not necessarily linked in with central banking and so on. But I hope that what I was suggesting, and perhaps there will have to be many other policies and things implemented, but I essentially think that we have to accept that society will always be in a hierarchy, right? But at the same time, there has to be a cap on how high the top bands can go. So in a sense, you can split it into like three classes, like the high class, middle class, lower class. And the problem is that, like now, is that, for example, the high class, like the people at the top of the high class, they can have like millionfold of what the people in the lower class have. That's a problem. It shouldn't be like that. It should be like, there should be a cap. It should be like, for example, that and the lower class is like going so low. There's not even like, so I'm saying there should be a cap at the top and a cap at the bottom. So the people in the lower class, like, we shouldn't even, like, this may seem idealistic, but I don't think so. Like, with all the technology we have now, like, it may take decades and a century or whatever, but there shouldn't be any homeless people. Like, how are we creating phones and the internet and AIs and this and that, and Elon Musk wants to fly to Mars and all of this stuff, and we still even have homeless people? See, the reason why we even have homeless people is because this system needs homeless people. For there to be rich people, there needs to be homeless people. There needs to be poor people in this system. And even in any system, there needs to be like poor people for there to be rich people. But I think the discrepancy is too large and imbalanced. So it's essentially taking that analogy that I'm using, because there's like with the meals, like when they're taking out meals, really what's fucked is that even as they're taking out meals, what eventually really would happen is that even though, let's say there's 10 people in the room, and then you took out like 9 and then 8 and then 7 and so on, like what would actually happen is that, let's say there was like 5 people left in the room. Oh no, there's 10 people left in the room and there's like 5 meals. Like it may seem like yeah, they would all split and then get half a meal each and so on and so forth, but no, actually the strongest, the most cutthroat people would start killing others. They not even would they only just take 1 meal, they would probably take like 3 of the 5 meals, and then the rest of like let's say there was 10 people in the room, 5 meals, then like the strongest guy killed 3 people, right? So there's 8 people left in the room, and there's 5 meals. He might take 3 of the meals, and then those 8 people will be left fighting for the scraps of those 2 meals. See, that's essentially what's happening, is that there's less and less in circulation, so there's more struggle fighting for the scraps. But the strong and the powerful, they are like taking more of like the scraps, so then it's left even less scraps for the poor, right? So and really, you see that those are still those are the powerful people, like still within the system. So like those are like some rich people, like some millionaires and so on, but those are not even the strongest people. The strongest people with the trillions and quadrillions, those are the people who are putting the meals and in the room and taking them out. That's like essentially the central banks, the ones who are putting the meals in the room and taking them out and so on. And then like the people in the room is society, the masses. See, even in society, even when there's the money's being inflated and there's less money in circulation or all this stuff, right? Like that may have sounded like I contradict myself, like that there can't be more inflation with less money in circulation. But I'm just saying, like the purchasing power and all of this stuff, right? Like even with less purchasing power and so on, there's still gonna be rich people. Like let's say even with 10 people, it's not a lot, but let's say there was 100 people in the room and so on. Like one of them's gonna become ultra rich, even with less and less like resource that they're fighting for. One of them's gonna still become ultra rich. It's just that the 99 others are gonna become extremely impoverished because there's less and less scraps that they're fighting for, and the strong and powerful one is taking even more of a cut from that small reserve of food or whatever, right? So, but that strong person who's taken the most, they're more powerful than the most. They're still like within the elite, but they're not at the top. Like those are the central banks which are controlling how much food goes in, how much food goes out, and so on and so forth. Right. So, and I think that this is like the core problem in society. Like people think, oh, like why is crime going up and this and that, and then people start pointing at surface level problems like immigration and this and that. And I'm not saying that these things don't have an influence. They definitely do, but it's not that. It's just because they're fighting for scraps. Like if you look at it clearly, there's more crime. More crime occurs when there's economic downturn. So it's natural. Like it's natural. Like it, if for example you put 3 lions in a large cage, but then you like fed that, you gave them like enough food that it could feed 10 lions. Those lions are not going to fight each other. They might play fight, but they're not going to really fight to the death. But then if you had 3 lions in a large cage, but then you fed them only enough for one, maybe they might not fight him on day one, but they probably even would on day one start fighting for that food. So it's like it's simple because they're just trying to survive. Like it's not even like they can decide, oh, like I'm hungry but I'm just not gonna eat. Like no, you need to eat. So essentially what I was gonna say is that I think there should be a cap on the top band and a cap on the bottom band, and it should be so that everyone in the common man, like the lower class, like class bracket, none of those should even be homeless, and they should all have their own home, and they all should have enough to be able to provide themselves like food, right? So they all have that like enough food, they all have enough to like own their own home, right? Everyone from the lower band, but then there's certain things that like luxuries perhaps that they might not be able to get, right? And then there should be incentives to, and it should also be in such a way to where people from the lower class can move up the bands, right? It's just that not even everyone, see, in this system that I'm kind of talking about, not everyone would even have the desire to move up because they're not in dire need. They're not malnourished, and they're not in such a lack that they have the burning desire to attain wealth because they're not lacking anything, because they're able to fulfill their basic needs, right? So there will be some people who will just be comfortable in that lower band because they don't really necessarily need to move up just to survive, right? But then there will still be some ambitious people, and then there should be like certain incentives and ways to where you can like clearly move from this band to this band. And it should be, for example, like let's say that this band, like just for measurement's sake, let's say like they all make on average 50,000 all from the lower band, and you only need 30,000, let's say, to cover all your expenses, right? And because of course like there's no like debt on interest and all these things, there will be perhaps not no inflation, but way less inflation. So these things will be more stable, right? So if it was kind of set that yes, you need 30,000 to pay for your yearly expenses, like for everything, and they're all making 50,000 on the lower class, and they still have money left over at the end of the year, right? But then let's say the middle class makes 75,000 or like 100,000, let's say. So 2 times what the lower class makes, but that's the cap. And then the higher class, and of course they would need to, like the lower class, the middle class would actually have to be providing more value to the system. Like not just sneakily siphoning and stealing like money through unethical means. Like they actually have to provide more value to the system. And then the highest band, which would be capped at perhaps 3 times what the lowest band makes, only 3 times more. So if these are making 50,000, the middle class are making 100,000, and the top class are making 150,000 a year, and it's capped like that. So there's still classes, there's still hierarchy, but it can't, like there can't really be like a monopoly built where like someone at the top has like 3 trillion and someone at the bottom has 10 cents. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like that to me seems unethical, and it just seems like that's not fair. That's actually not fair. So yeah, I may have like gotten a few details wrong, but I think that generally I covered the topic decently well, and I'm probably gonna make a lot more videos on this topic and topics like this. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. What can be done about these things, because I feel like more people are starting to become aware of these problems, because the negative effects are starting to show themselves. And I'm not saying things are gonna collapse this year or next year, whatever. But I'm not even saying there will be some Armageddon event, but there probably will be some kind of big reset or flushing, or there has to be something, because I don't see how, unless I'm missing something. I may be missing something completely, to where there's some aspect of the system that I'm not taking into account, which actually gives it a higher longevity than I perceive it to. However, if my perception is correct, this system, as I said, was good for the short term, to where, and when I'm saying short term, I'm not talking about 1 year, I'm still talking about decades and so on. So like this last century, there was a big boom and all this stuff, but that's what I'm saying. It seems like we've evolved and progressed so far, but what I'm saying is that a lot of that progression and that perceived progression and so on is just being overinflated in a bubble sense, right? It's like we're in a massive bubble in society, and it's being, those perceived progressions and gains and profits have actually been created by like overinflated currencies and just printing money, and so no actual real value or like evolution like has been provided. No real evolution has happened. So it's like, let's say for example, humans have improved from, just for measurement's sake, like let's say we was at just at 100, like 100 years ago, we was at a unit, a measurement of 100 of development, and let's say now we're at like 110, but the charts and all of this stuff will make it seem like we've like 10x'd in progression, but we actually haven't. So that discrepancy has to like rebalance, right? Because remember, like currency, like it works as like a dynamic balance system. It's like a scale, right? Because in actuality it is zero. So this misperception that we're so high above zero and so on and so forth, that eventually that dream, the American dream, is going to collapse because it was just a dream. And now people are realizing that the American dream is not there anymore. So in a sense, like a lot of the boomers and all of these lot who have lots of wealth, they attained all of that from the labor that we as Gen Z and these younger generations are having to pay for now. So their profit, like what like their profit and their perceived growth wasn't setting us up for victory and to progress even higher than them. It was actually just to bring themselves so high at our expense. And if humanity, like the generations, start like performing lower and less than the previous generations, then that would indicate that humanity has peaked and now we're degenerating. So we have to kind of create a system where it's setting us up like to where we're only seeing economic growth and we're only seeing all of this stuff if we really are progressing and we really are doing making great strides and authentic strides, like not strides, not like another like an analogy is I worked for 20 or 30 years and then I did this, I learned this skill, I provided this value, and then at the end I have a nice house, a nice family, a nice car, and I can say, yeah, like this is like the progress, this is what I've generated, this is the result. That's like authentic. But then inauthentic would be me, like obviously it'll be a lot like I'm not sure if you could really do this, but let's just say like me just going to the bank, taking $1 million loan, buying a Ferrari today and a mansion tomorrow, and then being like, yeah, look at my progress. But then see, like I'm gonna have to pay for that in the future because how am I gonna pay back that loan? See, but in this analogy, it's not even that necessarily that I am paying it off, but like my kids. Let's say I die with that debt now, then now my kids have to pay for it. See, like that's not a very good system. So, yeah. Let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed, give it a like. If you're new, please subscribe and please leave a comment on any of your ideas. So, yeah. Cheers.